Lincoln Riley is, I say this, he's a little like the Sean McVay of college football, is that he sees the world offensively from kind of a different view. And I said this a couple days ago. I went back and looked at the two quarterbacks he had at East Carolina. And I don't know them well, but their numbers were through the roof. And we've had this throughout the course of my life. I'm in my 50s now. Don Coryell saw the world differently and changed it. Bill Walsh saw the world differently and changed it. Sean McVay. And I think Lincoln Riley falls into that class, is that he is doing things. Bobby Bowden told me this years ago. This was years ago. He said, and I'll do a dadgum Bobby Bowden impression. When I used to work in Tampa, he said, I'd stay up and I'd watch those Oregon games. Man, they were doing crazy stuff. I'd get my pad out and I'd steal all their stuff. And back then it was like Chip Kelly, Mike Bellotti I was covering Oregon. They were doing different stuff offensively. And so with that, we introduce Lincoln Riley, who I'm just sucking up to here. Coach, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Colin.
You've done a remarkable job. You've made Oklahoma. It's very interesting because we were talking about Kyler Murray, and I think he's a first-round pick, and I think he works. But I do think that historically, even college and high school coaches, you'd ideally like to get a guy who's 6 feet, 6'2", 6'3". I mean, that's why we have these prototypes for left tackles and Mike linebackers. But Kyler Murray, there is an interesting thing here. He does not get the ball tipped at the line of scrimmage. Is that your offense, your spacing, or is that kind of a gift Kyler Murray has?
No, it's a gift. It's a gift. I think one of the things, so many people have tried to compare Kyler and Baker, and I think that's one of the things that they have in common. They've both been short all their lives. They both played quarterback all their lives, and they both have just a innate feel, to be able to, still throw balls over the middle, not get balls tipped, find the lanes, creative arm angles, all that it takes to do it, and it just doesn't affect those guys. And I think until somebody really coaches them and is in the trenches with them day in and day out like we've been, you don't really appreciate it until you see it. But we have never had an issue with it here with either one of those guys, and I don't think the Browns had an issue with Baker, and whoever drafts Kyler won't have an issue as well.
One of the reasons I was not a huge fan of Johnny Manziel to the NFL, the transition, or RG3, thin body frame. Now, I did say Baker's kind of thick, and he just throws a great ball. Russell Wilson, you see him in person, he's thick. Hips, shoulders, he's thick. Kyler is not, forget the height. He's about 205. Could I not be concerned a little bit that he likes to run, but Mitch Trubisky's a pretty thick kid. Could I worry about Kyler being small-ish prototype body?
No, and here's why. Those other guys you listed, especially Russell Wilson being maybe the best comparison. I mean, athletically, there's no comparison to this guy. I mean, this is like Barry Sanders running with the football as a quarterback. I'm not saying he's as good a runner as Barry Sanders, but the guy that has elite speed, elite quickness, and has a feel for not taking big hits when he runs. He took many, even though he ran more than Baker did, he took way less hits because he is so athletically gifted that he just avoids them. He just doesn't take big shots, and he's smart about it as well.
Did you expect him to choose baseball or football before his decision? Did he ask you for advice?
He did. I don't know that I had an expectation on it. I knew after talking to him some that he really loved football and that was going to be tough for him to leave. But I think also he wanted to make a good decision for his future too, and not just his passion. But I think he got to a point where he felt like it was the best for his future, and also the way for him to chase the sport that he was probably the most passionate about. His dad was a quarterback at A&M.
There was a weird interview on Dan Patrick where he didn't talk a lot. I did not love it. I said this. I wouldn't care generally, but quarterbacks I kind of see as a leadership position. I was bothered by that interview that he just kept turning to his dad. And I understand that in the quarterback world, and I've heard this from Pete Carroll and college coaches, dads often play a significant role. Dad was often a quarterback. Son becomes a quarterback.
Right.
That interview, dad was quarterback. How am I not worried about that a little?
Well, I think the toughest thing in that interview was he hadn't made his decision public yet, or maybe even completely made up his mind. And Kyler's he's a very thoughtful, methodical guy. Where you get a guy, of course, like Baker, as you've seen, will spit it right back at you immediately, as you know well.
Yes.
And Kyler's different. Kyler's a little quieter, a little bit more methodical, and I think he, certainly trying to be careful about what he says. It's everything with him has been so. There's been so much scrutiny around it and so much attention. And so I think now that, the world knows what he's going to do, he's let it out. I think, people will be able to see his personality more. But I got no concern about him being the face of a franchise or leading a franchise.
It's interesting. Jalen Hurts has joined you guys as a grad transfer, and it's interesting about transfers.
Yeah.
And this is where I differ from the media. I do believe that college athletes should be able to transfer, but I believe once. I think, listen, part of college sports is decision-making. My daughter's a college student, and I tell her, hey, I'm not there. You be careful when you go out with your friends. Be responsible. That's part of growing up. I think kids can make a bad decision, choose a wrong school, coach leaves, but I don't like multiple transfers because I think it puts stress on universities, the system, and frankly, coaches. What do you make of the new portal, this kind of new narrative that the media loves, which is kids should just be able to transfer whenever they want, wherever they want?
Yeah, I'm concerned about it, honestly. I do think there's some benefits and some positives. I think, coaches not being able to restrict where players go. I think I totally agree with that. But I don't like the fact that players, especially players that have not graduated, can transfer somewhere, hire a lawyer, and then find a way to become eligible. I don't like the message it sends. I know the big argument has been, well, coaches are able to go from school to school, but there's a couple different things. One, coaches are professionals. We had to go through college and all that to get our degrees to be able to coach, and we had to go through the steps to become a college coach. And then every coach in America that has any more than a multi-year contract right now has a buyout. And so if you leave, there are ramifications for breaking a contract. And these guys that come in on scholarship, they're on a 4 or 5 year contract with that scholarship. And so I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to leave. I think players do deserve rights. I do think they deserve a choice of where to go. But I think there's got to be, unless you're a graduate, I think there's got to be some type of ramification for changing. And I think that's because right now we're teaching them something that when they get to the rest of their life in the real world, it's not like that. And we're teaching them, we're giving them, I think, a false impression of what the real world is really going to be like for these guys.
Yeah, that's really well put, and I totally agree. Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma Sooners head coach. They have always been a power. I'm in my 50s. There's very briefly been times when they weren't a dominant program. It is interesting. You're in the Big 12. There's a style you got to play in the Big 12, and then you get to the playoffs, and that style sometimes maybe not a perfect setup to play a Bama or a Clemson, but you guys have pulled it off. You always look the part. I want to go to, you're going to get mentioned for NFL jobs. Urban Meyer's been mentioned. Saban, even in his 60s, was mentioned. If I was your agent, I'd say, Lincoln, win some college games, have some fun. Oklahoma's one of the great jobs in America, but I do think you, as a great offensive mind, there will be times in your life, as you're a young man now, you're an aspirational guy. You don't get to be the Oklahoma coach without big dreams. Do you envision a time 7, 8, 9 years perhaps that your worldview changes and you'll want to be challenged against the world's greatest coaches?
That's a good question. I don't know, and it's not one I spend a lot of time on right now. I know I don't feel that right now. I mean, this is like you said, this is one of the great coaching jobs in all of sports, and I recognize that. And we got so many big things ahead of us here that I don't want to ever say never. I never want to be the guy that says I'm never going to do it. 10 years down the line, I'd change my mind and decide to do it. But I'm very happy here. It's a good fit for me, my family. I love what we're doing here, and I think there's a lot of things about the college game that I really prefer right now. So I never know down the line, but I'm in the short term here. I'm very, very excited and happy to be here.
By the way, I don't hate Baker. I put him on my show. I thought he was a riot. I find him absolutely fascinating to watch. And by the way, you don't know this, but I was told by an NFL general manager is the reason he moved up the charts, because there was some concerns about his size and some of the, off-field stuff a little bit, that they thought he was so well coached at Oklahoma under you that he would go to the whiteboard. And I had a GM say he was so far ahead of the other quarterbacks on the whiteboard, and that momentum started a lot of the Lincoln Riley talk. So that's what I was told by a GM, that he was so good and so well coached. So I don't hate him, and he's a heck of a fun guy to watch. But I will say this. I got to ask you this. When you look at a quarterback, he was a walk-on. He wasn't big enough. Give me one or two things for our audience as one of the real progressive thinkers in football. Kyler's 5'9.5", 5'10". Baker was a walk-on. What is the it you look for in a high school quarterback? What is, because everybody thinks, well, he's big and he's got a big arm. Is there an it you look for?
Yeah, the big arm doesn't matter a whole lot. I mean, that doesn't come into play a ton. I mean, physically, what we look for, the number one thing we look for is, are they accurate? They've got to be accurate, and they've got to be a good enough athlete. They're not always going to be Kyler Murray's. There's only one of those out there, but they've got to be good enough athletically. The biggest thing we look for, though, was a guy winner. I mean, and at the end of the day, if you're a good enough high school player, then your team, as a quarterback, your team's going to win. And you may not win the state championship. You may not have all the other best players on your team, but you're going to win. And that's one thing Baker and Kyler both had in common. Is all they've ever done is win. And you can, and that's, I think, a trait that becomes expected. And I think you can just tell so much out of a guy that gets the most out of his teammates and finds a way to win and finds a way to play his best in big moments. And so we really try to evaluate those things hard and get to know the kids. And, luckily we had two guys like that came in and have done well. But that's kind of set the stage here for more great ones here in the future.
Yeah, I always felt Colt McCoy at Texas had a lot of that. He didn't blow you away in the hotel lobby, but God, I saw that guy pull out more last-second wins over the course of 3 or 4 years. I think his dad, by the way, was also a coach. That doesn't hurt.
He was.
Yeah. Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma Sooner head coach, 10 minutes. Thank you so much for your time, Coach.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Lincoln Riley. He's one of those offensive guys that he just sees the world differently, and he's going to be around a long time. But I also think to be the Oklahoma head coach, you have to have some sort of drive that is beyond average. That's just a great job. That's a top 6 job in college football. So aspirationally, I think there will be, does he hit a ceiling after 2 national titles or after 6 straight? I don't know if he's going to win 6 straight Big 12 championships. I think Texas next year is going to be stacked.